So at this time, I am going to hand the floor over to Judy Ryan, who will lead the next presentation, Bridging Globalization, Diversity, and Technology with Emotional Intelligence for Resilience and Agility to Meet Today's Rapid Change and Uncertainty. Before I hand over the program to Judy, let me tell you a little bit about her. When Beethoven saw a piano, he saw a symphony. When Judy Ryan meets people, she sees the unseen beauty and the truth beneath the surface and uncovers it. And that truth, the one that's really happening under that surface, is what we all need to see. The old ways of understanding human systems aren't working anymore. The way of superior versus inferior, or management versus employee or parent versus child. They never did, not without lasting, serious, negative side effects. And our world is suffering because of this. We need a powerful, positive, and sustainable transformation. Judy's culture transformation process and framework makes an impact that stays with people long after they learn it. This is because she provides a way of being that becomes instilled in people at all ages in all roles. She translates culture evolution theory into actionable, concrete realities. She provides a new language and set of standardized professional behaviors that rely on best practices, intuition, and that push past limiting beliefs, allowing everyone to step into a powerful future. Judy's work is her calling, and that's reflected in her mission to create a world in which all people love their lives. Judy, welcome. You have the virtual stage.
Hey, everybody. I am so glad to have Tara with this on me because not only are we colleagues, we're friends. So thank you for that introduction, Tara, and for kind of watching for questions today. So really appreciate that. I'm really excited to present this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and take my own video down so there's no distractions from the presentation itself. And I'm going to get started. So as you can see, this is a big chunk of a name, right? Bridging Globalization, Technology, Diversity, and Emotional Intelligence. And you might be wondering, what is all of that about? How do we do it? What is it? Why does it matter to me if right now it's all about building foundation? So I want to start out by just telling you the objectives for today. And then also I want to give you a story because a lot of times we can really begin to understand what some of these terms mean by hearing stories. So my objective is to really educate you on what is one of the newest versions of organizational culture today. And why do you need it? What it is, why do you need it? And in our language, it's called a responsibility-based culture. And then the next thing I want to do is I want you to understand what it takes to implement a transformation process for a culture. Whether you do it now or later, eventually it is going to be a situation where either evolve or die. And the same is true not only for our technologies and for our diversity and inclusion and all kinds of things that are trending right now. Culture is complex enough now that we need to have a framework and we need to know how to do it and how to do it consistently, especially if we're a national or multinational company or organization. And then I also want you to understand the importance of systems integration for maintaining a sense of consistency and sustainability around human systems, which are how people think, speak, act, and feel. And so not only is it important to understand what framework and what culture is important, but how do I make it operational on a day-to-day basis? So those are the objectives. And the story I want to tell is it's actually about a real thing that occurred in one of our school projects. We do a lot of school reform as well as work in corporate and nonprofit and government settings. But this happened to be a project where there was a school that only one teacher was doing our responsibility-based culture model. And one of the things that you're going to hear me say is the importance of task ownership. So task ownership means I know how to manage myself and I know how to manage things like relationships with other people. And I know how to manage my own productivity, my own engagement, my own plan for whatever's next for my growth. And so this is a story about a teacher who had learned this model, was trying to implement it with her students, and was still struggling with how do I transfer responsibility to these students so that they pick it up. So It just so happened that the day I came was a classroom meeting day. And one of the students is an 8th grade boy who came to the meeting and said, I want to add something to the agenda for our classroom meeting. I'm being bullied by a homeroom teacher. And so when it was his turn, what he told us is that there was this new pledge that was recommended to the school and that they were all adopting, and it was called the Peace Pledge. So just as the kids were doing the Pledge of Allegiance, they also had the instruction to put their hand on their heart and from their heart say, I commit to use my words and actions from peace. And what happened was that this particular teacher pointed at everybody with a real stern voice and said, look, if any of you don't do this pledge, you're going to get a detention, which is kind of ironic in my mind. And so he said, and I don't like that. I don't appreciate being bullied about something so personal. And that's what my issue is. And so the teacher said, would you kind of show me how you would transfer responsibility in this situation? And so what I did was I asked him, what do you want concerning peace? Do you want peace in the school? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, okay. Do you want peace with that teacher who's bullying you? And he said, yeah, I do. And I said, well, good, then I can help you. So then I went on to ask him, are you willing to see where you're doing war? And he said, me? How am I the one doing war? She's the one bullying me. You even agreed with me. And I said, it is true. And yet, would you be willing? You're the one that says you want peace with her. Are you willing to look at your part? And he said, okay, which is pretty brave of him. And I said, do you ever say bad things about her behind her back? And he said, well, yeah, I hate her. I said, wonder if there's anything warlike about hate and about gossip. And he said, yeah, I guess there is. And I said, do you ever go to this teacher and try to work out your problems with her? Like this situation, would you ever go to her and have a conversation about it? And he said, well, no, because we're all afraid of her. And I said to him, do you know that fear of another person is attack towards them? It's an attack stance. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, if a dog comes running up to you real vicious and its tail is down and its teeth are bared and it's, barking at you, if you get more scared, does that dog get more aggressive and hostile or less? And he said, he gets more hostile. And I said, you're absolutely right. Why? And he said, I don't know. I never thought of it. And I said, well, the reason he gets more hostile is because when you have an attitude of fear towards any person or even a creature like a dog, they sense it as you don't like them. You have them in a monster box. You have them as enemy. So your very fear is your war posture. And he said, wow, I didn't know that. And I said, well, now that you know these are some of the ways you're doing war through hate, gossip, and fear, what do you want to do now? And he said, well, I want to go to her now, but I just don't know how to do it. I'm just afraid. I feel, like I don't know what to do. And so I said, well, isn't it great that you have 20 fellow students and a teacher and even a consultant in the room to help you figure that out? And what was really cool about that was that some of the other students said right away, hey, I'll go with you because I've been doing WAR too, and I haven't realized I was doing WAR either. So I'll go with you and I'll practice with you. And together the classroom worked together to kind of role play and figure out how they were going to go to her and how they were going to do it, all holding the intention of peace. So the only job of the teacher and myself was to make sure that we had handed off the responsibility and that they did not lose sight of the ultimate goal, which was peace. And so that's why the most important thing you can do with anybody in your workplace, in your home, in your community, is when something's happening, you want to say, what is it that you want right now? Because what do I want allows the person to go, wow, do I want peace or do I want to take this person out? Take them down. And luckily, he wanted to go for peace and he was very coachable. And the reason he was also coachable is people can feel whether you're there to help them or you're there to criticize and condemn them. So he could feel that I had compassion for him and that I was asking him real and honest questions for him to consider. The other thing I want you to know about this story is, first of all, you want all of your employees, everybody from CEO to frontline staff, you want them to be able to manage their relationships. You want them to be able to manage their own energy, their own engagement levels. And that's what it means to be agile and resilient. It means that you're able to respond, which is what a responsible person is, and that you have learned to manage how to take care of yourself, but also take care of other people in a joint mutuality of respect and mutual care. Another thing that I see happen a lot of times in businesses is they bring in a newfangled tool like the Peace Pledge, but they put it on top of a culture that's dysfunctional, just like this homeroom teacher brought in this beautiful Peace Pledge and put it on top of a very bullying type of dynamic that she was used to playing out. So there's lots of lessons in this story, and I'll be referring back to it because it is so directly connected with how do we help people to be resilient? How do we help them to be strong and responsible people? So before I go into what that culture looks like, I just want to mention a few front-facing challenges. So we have challenges such as complexity. So I've just named a few here. The agile that Marty talked about, artificial intelligence, digital transformation. What are these things going to mean to us? A lot of people are struggling with just the speed of change or the complexity that's going on in general, much less through all these technology changes. We're dealing with differences between people, and it's just more in our face. We've always had diversity, but we've just got more awareness about where there's barriers and where there are places where things aren't working well. And then we have challenges with just the management of people, and how do we get really good people to come to work for us, to be developed well, to stay engaged, and to want to stay, or if they want to leave, know how to do it in a responsible and modern, if you will, manner, because this is a bit of a gig economy and people are going to come and go. But if you can help them be as full of integrity and responsibility as possible, that's the trick. So if you study any of the surveys from Gallup, you probably already know that about 70% of people are disengaged to one degree or another, with at least 15 or 16% seriously disengaged, where they're actually causing cost to the organization. And they definitely interrupt cross-functional teamwork. And so we need to be able to handle, how do we help people be leaders and followers? You could see that that student was becoming a leader in that situation, and he was able to, and he had people on his team that wanted to follow him as a leader. So there's a lot of things that need to happen within people that we are challenged by. We're also challenged by how fast innovation is occurring. So out of the Fortune 500 companies from 1955, 22 of them are left. That's a lot of companies that have gone under. And not because of a pandemic, but just because they couldn't stay relevant. They couldn't stay ahead of the competition. And so there are things that are happening that if we're busy trying to fight all the fires of people behaviors, we can't stay ahead of what's going on in the world in other areas. So you want to make sure that you handle your culture in such a way that you're poised and ready and capable of being innovative. Poor behavior, I kind of mentioned that already when I talked about disengagement, that high number of disengagement, but a lot of this shows up as just a lot of broken trust, a lot of conflict and gossip, a lot of arguing. In fact, I'll just tell you that teacher who was doing this work, she was an excellent teacher and she loved her students. But she came to me after that experience and said, I want to go and work with other adults because we can teach these kids all that's there to learn about science and math and reading and all of these other things. But if we don't teach them how to take personal responsibility for their relationships and their productivity, we really haven't served them well. And she could see it because she was in such contrast to the other people in her group. So a lot of times when you're changing culture, it might be just within a certain department of your organization, and you will see the difference in the poor behavior. It goes away when you do it well. And what happens because of all of these challenges is that everybody's physical well-being is impacted. There's a lot more illness, absenteeism, health costs go up, all kinds of things occur. So we all know that these are our front-facing challenges. It's just quite a lot when you see it up close and personal. Here's a really big reason that's not so front-facing, and that is the interior experience that people are having. So our work is based on the work of Alfred Adler, who was around during the time of Freud and Carl Jung and some of the other biggies. He just did not get the press that they got. And I believe it's because his psychology actually disrupts the power structures that we've been in for centuries. It's just now coming in to vogue to start understanding the kind of psychology that Adler had. In fact, there's a book I read about him last year called The Courage to be Disliked. The authors of this book who were in Japan said that Adler was at least 100 years ahead of his time, which puts him right now. So he was the one that coined the phrase inferiority complex. And basically what he said is if you don't create certain conditions and conversations, you will not have psychological safety and people will enter into uninterrupted struggles. Now, this woman, she doesn't look like she's in an inferiority complex. She looks like she's very confident. She's got her act together. But a lot of times underneath that is a much bleaker picture. And this picture is probably about as bleak as anybody could find. But it's really important to understand that under that surface of everything's fine, a lot of people are having internal struggles going on. So those struggles could be addiction and obesity and all of the things you see listed here. All that disengagement, that 71%, starts internally. And then what happens is it also turns into these external struggles like win-lose dynamics, all the isms, racism, ageism, sexism, even the isms between temperaments and not tolerating each other's differences, or even beyond tolerant, where we embrace and we appreciate each other. So these struggles are very real and we can see them all over the place right now. And so all of misbehavior, all of negative behavior, all of disengagement comes from this inferiority complex. So it's very important that we understand that. And there's a modern day person who speaks on this topic as well. If you don't know her, her name is Brene Brown. And she said that she still gets people who invite her to speak and say, just don't talk about that shame stuff. It's a little dark and it makes people uncomfortable. And she said it's her number one platform. And in a sense, it's our number one platform because inferiority complex comes from not having healthy cultures, whether it's in the home or the workplace. Another hidden challenge is we don't feel 4 core needs that we need to feel. So Adler said we're also social beings. There's some really great movies right now. One is called Happy. One is a documentary called I Am. One is a documentary called Finding Joe. And they all conclude that one of the beautiful gifts of our being a human being is how social we are, how we're hardwired for cooperation and for belonging and finding a significant way to belong. So when we do have healthy belonging and significance, we feel empowered. We feel that we have a voice. We feel that we can impact other people or impact conditions that are happening. And as you can tell right now, there's a lot of people that don't feel empowered. And it's because we're under higher levels of stress. That happens whether there is a pandemic or if there is a merger or an acquisition or fast growth. So these core needs, if they're there, your system is going to be very strong. If they're not there, your system is going to really start feeling the stress and the cracking under it. So empowered is very important. Not everybody always feels like they have a voice. Lovable is different than feeling loved. I would say if people feel a sense of belonging and significance, they do feel loved. There's somebody somewhere that is supporting them in a very helpful manner. Lovable is a different thing than being loved. Lovable is when people are receptive to each other to a high degree. That means that they're receptive from a place of, I want to hear how you think, and I want to see how and acknowledge how you feel. I have no agenda to fix you, convert you, heal you, or change you, which is difficult because nowadays everybody wants to go, well, let me tell you how wrong you are and how right I am. So making people feel lovable means that you make what they think and feel more important than if you agree with it or not. And that's very difficult for people. Another one is that we need to feel connected. We need to feel that we're welcome into a community of people who care about us. The more communal we are, the more that we can get done as a people. And a lot of us don't know how to do community very well. Another need that we have is the need to feel that we have contributions to make. And most of us aren't giving each other opportunities to contribute because we're in inferiority complex. So because we're in inferiority complex, it's hard for us to put our own agenda down. It's hard for us to connect. It's hard for us to speak up in a way that's unifying. And by gosh, we're not going to ask for help unless we're practically dying. And so what we do is we rob each other of the opportunities to feel contributing with each other. So don't be afraid to reach out to people and say, hey, I could really use help right now, even if it's in a small way that they can succeed in. So when you think of these 4 core needs, they're so important. And yet, if you even think about what chatter is in your own mind, is it the chatter that makes you feel empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing? Or is it the chatter that makes you feel the opposite? And the same thing, the same questions should apply to how you're creating your culture experience in your home, your schools, your communities, your churches, everywhere. It's really radically important. Another challenge that is a little bit under the radar is we don't know how to do authentic teamwork. So what happens is people start out in a pseudo state of community. And it doesn't mean that this is all bad. This is where you put your best foot forward. This is where you look for what you have in common. This is the honeymoon phase in all relationships. It's the one where you say, oh my gosh, we're so much alike and we want these same things. And it's a good thing until it becomes a prison. So for a lot of people, they don't want to get out of this. They kind of want to keep everything very surface, very positive. And if they stay stuck there and they can't progress along beyond this, it can become very inauthentic, very boring, very play it safe kind of community or teamwork. So what often happens with people eventually, if they are working in close proximity at all, is that eventually the differences will show up. And rather than be excited about those differences and respectful of those differences, we start to try to fix and convert and change people, generally without their permission or their desire to be changed. And so in that process, we get into power struggle with people. And whether it's aggressive or very passive looking, it does not feel good. And this is where people will leave relationships. They leave personal relationships, they leave professional relationships. So the real key is to avoid this stage, not in not having differences, but not getting into that place of fixing and converting anybody. And that state is called empty. And it's empty not because it's a bleak place to get to in relationship. It's a place empty of those agendas. So look at that person's face. He's looking like he's curious. He's looking like he's compassionate. Those are really key elements to being an empty. When you're an empty, you're more about, tell me about that. You're more about, oh, that's interesting that you see it that way. Can you help me see it even more? And a lot of people will say to me, well, how do you ever get anything done if you get in this empty state? Well, you will get things done, but you can't get things done without making sure that you stop in this place, because what you're practicing in the state of empty is respect, receptivity, recognition, and just being able to be really open and disclosing. And we can't be doing that if somebody's constantly trying to fix us and change us on either side of the coin. So once you do empty well, what happens is you organically move into authentic community with people. That's where you get more done. That's where you do problem solve. But now you're with a group of people who know you care about them because they've taken the time to just accept you and to get to know you. And from this place, people are straightforward and they're honest with each other and they're calling each other on things that don't feel terrible when they do it. Like, hey, you said you'd follow through on something. Will you make sure you follow through next time? Or wherever there's a breakdown in any kind of trust, it gets handled in authentic community. And so all of that stress of not being an authentic community is gone. Another challenge that everybody faces that we don't think about is when we have unresolved psychological contracts. And a psychological contract is sort of like an assumption, but it's an assumption around everyone thinking they know what they're entitled to get or receive and what they're required to give. And so we have this in our head, what that all is. And then what happens is we don't agree with someone else. We're not aligned with someone else's idea about us or themselves. We have a whole different worldview of it. And then because we don't know how to talk about it, we leave each other emotionally or physically. And sometimes by the time you even know there's a problem, it either is too late or it just feels too late. So the psychological contract itself is not the problem. The problem is that we think everybody else thinks like we do. And why are they acting that way if they know better? And it might be that they don't think that way at all, and it isn't necessarily wrong. So I'm going to give you an example of an unresolved psychological contract that is very common, but I want to just let you know is not the only psychological contract that we could be looking at. It's just one. And so don't think of it synonymously like psychological contract means the problems between the generations. It's just one example. So being a baby boomer myself, I understand the way baby boomers have defined, their psychological contracts. We were taught you got to earn respect, and the older a person gets, the more respect they deserve. Not necessarily all wrong, any of the things on the boomer side, and not wrong on the millennial side, but very different sets of expectations because it's a different world that both groups are operating from. So what happens that becomes destructive is the baby boomers will say to me, will you come and do a talk so we can fix these millennials? Because otherwise I'm not going to work with another one of them. They're just so judgmental. And the same is coming from the millennial employees. They're saying, these dinosaur baby boomers just don't get it where we're heading with technology. And, why can't I teach them? Because I could go out on the internet and become a subject matter expert on something that I'm passionate about. Why do I have to be taught by them all the time? And that's all very accurate. Like all of them have legitimate concerns, but when they don't talk about it, then the mudslinging becomes the experience. And people don't even realize they're doing it. They just have this unease with one another and they don't know how to work through that. The next thing I want to do is I want to spit in your soup. And I'm so grateful that I found this disgusting picture because it certainly doesn't make you want to eat the soup in that little bowl anymore. And so what soup am I spitting in? I'm spitting in the soup of cultures of control. This is probably the hardest thing in my work, is to get people to understand that the foundations of most homes, schools, and workplaces are control-based. And we don't see it as the cause of the problem. So when people are using cultures of control, profit becomes number one. I see this happening in Japan right now because they've made profit so important that people won't do social distancing and they won't make people and purpose first. They even have a ceremony for people that work themselves to death because profit and economic development is it's the number one priority over people. So when you use cultures of control, there's a lot of transactional behaviors. People become kind of pawns in the game as opposed to people. There's a lot of hierarchical kind of relationships. There's a high emphasis on external motivation and a high emphasis on just getting people to do it because I said so and just get it done. I don't care if it's commitment. I just want compliance and I'll settle for that. So here are some of the control models that you will recognize and some you may not recognize. The first one is the command and control, as they call it in the corporate world. It's the autocratic mindset. The belief that you hold about people is they can't be trusted. And you think it's your job to manage them, especially if you have a title manager. And really, it's not. A good manager does not manage other people's behavior. So I can imagine right now some of the managers that are using this model would find it very difficult for their people to be functioning outside of their view at home. But the accountability approach is do what I say or else. And so what you get at best are resentfully compliant people, or at worst you get rebellious people. Another one that's kind of a surprise is the control model of using incentives and rewards. And one of the reasons this was so popular when it came out is because there were studies done about it initially, but what people didn't realize is it was studies with lab rats by a doctor named Skinner. And with animals, incentives work every single time. What is now showing up in the research is that when you dangle carrots, you're holding a very limited belief about people that they're kind of selfish and lazy, and that I'm supposed to motivate them by dangling these carrots. And what has been found is that people will actually lose their internal reasons for doing good things. It diminishes the very commitments that we want from people by dangling carrots. It also makes them more self-focused. It often creates a scarcity mindset. It creates competition. It creates rushing through things so that you can get to the carrot and quality goes out the window. There's a whole lot of things that show it as not only being ineffective, but actually being counterproductive. So one of the things that's really important to remember is the reason I'm spitting in the soup is because these two control models, quote unquote, work. They work like holding a gun to somebody's head, or bribing somebody can sometimes work. But they have a ton of negative side effects that work directly against the 4 core needs. So it's important to understand that so that you can realize why it's important to spit in the soup. Because if you don't really believe these are all that bad, you'll go back to them. And that's what happened in that classroom. The teacher was very autocratic. Do it or else you get a detention. Now, this control model is a little less obvious to people, but it's also one of the hardest ones to overcome. Mainly because so many of us are in unhealthy communities where we're already in the inferiority complex. We're already doing some level of struggle. And so this is a quadrant where people actually hold other people as less deserving. Like, I'm the boss, so I get to bestow on you either praise or my criticism. And it's all done in order to try to manipulate you into doing what I want you to do, into pleasing me. So it might sound like, go out and knock it out of the park for me, make me proud, or it can be, I'm so disappointed in you. And what happens is people either become fearful of the judgment and what it could mean, or they become people pleasers and brown nosers, and they stop being honest and authentic and innovative and creative, because now it's all about just keeping the boss happy. Worst case scenario, they look at that boss and think, who died made you, God? Who are you to bestow your judgment on me? No, I won't. You can't make me. So a lot of things come out of this, but it's just a little more subtle. This is another hard one for people to wrap their heads around, and it's pampering and spoiling people. And the belief you're holding about people is you're not as capable as I am. And so what happens is you overcompensate for them, and it becomes all about, I want you to have this extra support so that you become this wildly responsible adult. And the reality of it is you create entitlement and you create weak sense of self-esteem when you pamper and spoil people. I see this a lot in organizations where they say things people already know, or they do things for people that they're capable of doing themselves. It very much causes a cycle of learned inadequacy. Adler said that pampering and spoiling is more harmful than physical punishment, for example, in a family, because it weakens that intrinsic motivation. And that's because all cultures of control are based on extrinsic motivation, trying to motivate people from the outside in and holding really limiting beliefs about them. So you believe your job is to manage, motivate, judge, and pamper them. So Einstein said a lot of really smart things. One of the things that he said is we can't solve our problems with the same thinking that we used when we created those problems. And the thinking that I'm referring to in this slide is the control models. If we could only realize that the control models that we're swimming in are defeating all the wonderful tools that we're trying to bring to the table unless we let those go first. That's why in our work, we spend some pretty significant time on how do you let go of the control models and what do you replace them with? Because every tool we give them after that will have a much better chance of being positive and work for them when the foundation is much more stable. So this program is all about having a strong foundation. The control models are not a strong foundation, so we want to give those up. What we want instead is a culture of responsibility. And responsibility, again, is that ability to respond. So when you have a culture of responsibility, everyone makes people and purpose the top priority. It doesn't mean profit isn't on the table. It is. It's very much on the table. But profit flows organically when you make people and purpose first. Instead of it being transactional, like, are you worth anything to me or not, which is very objectifying, you're relational. You make your relationships with people important. It's all about sharing power. It's about developing people's internal motivation. And it's about developing true commitment, which is A+ behavior, instead of compliance, which is usually C- behavior. So a responsibility-based culture is very different. First, you'll notice that the beliefs about people are very different. Instead of you're selfish and lazy and I don't trust you and you're inferior and all that, the belief you're holding about people is that you are great and you want to be great. And a lot of times people don't look great because the conditions that they're enmeshed in do not make them feel empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. But if you can just have faith that deep down inside, they want to be great, even if they're not showing up great, you're going to treat them very differently than when you've already written them off as selfish, lazy, or, just stupid or whatever. So rather than managing, motivating, evaluating, judging, and pampering people, you learn how to mentor them. Or even if you're not the one to mentor them, you make mentoring a regular staple for every single person in your organization. And it's what we were doing in that story. We were helping to transfer responsibility. And we were doing it so that people, in this instance, that 8th grader was taking task ownership for that relationship. And what you cultivate are people that become self-directed and fully engaged. And just like being irresponsible is contagious, being responsible is contagious. That's why in that story, the other students started becoming more self-directed and engaged. The teacher became more self-directed and engaged and wanted to make a bigger impact. So it's a really positive cycle. And what it requires, instead of extrinsic motivation, in this model, you're developing people's internal motivation. Because we do need rewards, but not the rewards that are dangled from the outside of us. We need the internal rewards that come when we're behaving in ways that make us feel empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. Those are the real rewards, and they're internal. So in our model, everyone is mentored. And I'm going to just play a little clip of one of our clients who's actually a healthcare client who is just performing amazingly. And I've gotten a couple of emails about them, and they're having to design on the fly, talk about being agile. And these clips, a lot of these clips are going to be on their workplace environment. So everyone is mentored in this model.
Setting aside a time specific to working on these skills brings that clarity, needed clarity to the team.
First off, I get a chance to be seen and be heard by someone directly. In my mentoring sessions, I feel important and I feel listened to. I also love the fact that I'm able to practice the tools that we learn in our sessions one-on-one, so that I can then take it back to the actual scenario that's happening and practice it live in real life.
I get an opportunity to kind of talk about my fears and how I can develop as a person.
Nice. It's really nice to get to mentoring because it's one-on-one. I can read a lot. You can read any book or get any information, but actually applying it to my specific instant situation is different. Having the one-on-one time very, very much helps with that.
I just wanted you to have a little bit of a taste of that. You can hear in their voices how they are happy and comfortable being supported. So I just wanted you to know that that's a real thing that people can do. And it doesn't have to be the manager mentoring. It might be that the manager mentors an employee and the employee then mentors the manager. And there's a lot of peer mentoring going on, but it's making time for people one-on-one when they've learned something, so that they can actually go through trying on new things and then finding out what worked and what didn't work. So I'm going to just, before I go into this quote, I see a note from Tara that there's been a question. So Tara, what is the question?
Hi, Judy. There are actually 2 questions, but we're going to start with this one. So how do you help senior management understand the importance of this type of culture, especially in a time of crisis when profit goes first?
Okay, so part of it is to actually be able to bring facts to them. So I barely touched on it, but disengagement is a very measurable expense. In a company with 100 employees, there's over $250,000 lost to active disengagement in those companies. And that's based on Gallup's typical numbers. And 55% of the people are doing C- work. In other words, they're there for the paycheck. They're not there to go above and beyond or do their A game. And that group is supposedly not costing a company, but to me, if you have mediocrity, you're losing leads and referrals and people that are giving their all. They're more likely to scrimp on their time if they're working from home right now. I'd be concerned that there's that many people out there in the workplace. And even when you think you have control over them, you don't, because the numbers keep showing. So what happens is the 29% of people who are fully engaged they get discouraged by the disengagement, and they're sort of aware of their strengths. They're aware that they're an A-game player and that they don't have to stay in an environment that isn't very good for them. So you put at risk over $900,000 from the people that are in that 29%, because each one of them is found to bring in about $32,000 per year per person, which is how that number comes along. So when you put together the 250,000 that the 16% of really misbehaving people are doing, and then the possible loss of another $900,000, that's real profit numbers. And people need to know what those numbers are, and they need to know what those costs are. So part of it is those that are profit driven, they need to start making the connection between we're leaking money all over the place when we don't have a certain kind of culture. So that would be the first thing. The other thing is, if a person is reading anything that's being written right now by Simon Sinek or Patrick Lencioni or any of the big thinkers out there, they're going to know it's time for change, and that there are real case studies showing the cost of not changing and the savings of changing. So really, it kind of depends on how self-aware, and which also kind of leads into this quote, which I'll mention more in a minute. So hopefully that gives you a starting point, is you have to have an intelligent conversation with C-suite executives about what it's costing them to not fix their culture. And a lot of them, they have a hard time really facing that. Tara, do you want to ask me another question that you have?
I do, and there are a few more coming in, but the next one is, so in a world where diversity of thought is becoming important, how do you see the evolution of mentoring when people tend to mentor people that are just like them?
Well, first of all, a great question. I would say our mentoring is very different than what most people think of as mentoring. Most people think of mentoring as advice or counsel. Ours is not either of those. Ours is a very strict and guided process where it's very Socratic, because emotionally intelligent people are people that are self-aware and then self-manage. They're aware of relationships and they manage those relationships. And you cannot do that if you're constantly feeding people information. That's what we do when we pamper and spoil them. Hopefully you guys could see that with that 8th grade boy, I didn't jump in and say, well, let me tell you what to do. I said, do you want peace? Do you want peace with that teacher? Are you willing to look at war? Can you see how Socratic that is? And now what do you want to do? Now that you know that fear is attack, what do you want to do? Oh, isn't it great you have these students? What do you think about doing this brainstorming together? So we have to train ourselves to make mentoring into, how do I help you back to the tools you've already learned and the awarenesses you need to see and the priorities our company has set for one another around people? How do I help you back to that and then take you quickly to a point where you make decisions about how you're going to take action? That can be done super effectively in 30 minutes if people know how to stick to that mentoring model, use that mentoring template, and avoid the mentoring pitfalls. So it's amazing what can be done when you have a foundation of concepts and tools and you have good structure around how to implement those structures. So, implementing the structures and how to keep implementing them is the trick. Thank you, Laura. Any others? You said you have a few more?
There is one more at this time. So who in the organization is responsible for culture monitoring and managing?
Most organizations think HR is. Our experience is HR is often threatened by change. They tend to have a lot of really strong, detail-oriented people that are more conventional. I know this is a broad generalization, just been my experience. A lot of times the HR department will feel defensive about culture because they believe they're already handling it, or they're afraid that they're not handling it and they feel uncomfortable with that. Where we find the most receptivity is in the operations area, because the CEO is usually overly inundated. They may be aware of what's going on, but the COOs are watching for productivity and profitability to a large degree, but they're not so caught up in the profitability that they're more focused on the productivity and performance. So I would say the best entry point is either an operations person or a technology or agility executive. And in some cases, that could also be a diversity and inclusion executive. If they're in an executive position for diversity and inclusion, chances are they have taken it seriously to create an inclusive culture would be the priority. So that's where we find our biggest entry point is operations.
Wonderful. Thank you. We're good for now.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Great questions. Keep them coming. Change blindness. This is one of my very favorite quotes this year. I love quotes. I use them frequently. This one is not necessarily inspiring, but it's so important to think about. This is by Samuel Arbesman, and he said that we have a problem with change blindness. And it's not that we don't even have the new facts, because you can read tons and tons of articles now that talk about the kind of culture that I'm talking about. But what happens is we don't necessarily want to go out of our way to learn what the new things are. Like, for example, I learned about veganism in January and I've become a vegan instantly. But it's been difficult because I have to go out of my way to be a good vegan, to learn how to cook like a good vegan. So it's not like excruciating, but I have to go out of my way. And that's what is really required for any growth in our lives. And a lot of people are just kind of fat and happy. And hopefully this pandemic is allowing people to recognize the places where they've become complacent. But a bigger problem is the failure to question that the facts that we've been relying on are out of date. So if I were to say to this group, and I'm not going to ask it, I'm just posing this, how many of you would expect to get a cell phone update in the next 4 to 5 years? Most of you would raise your hands, unless you're like one of my sisters who still has a flip phone. But the vast majority of people expect for things to go out of date. And we don't feel ashamed of the phone we used to have. But when it comes to human systems, to emotional intelligence, it's as if people think that should never be changing and we should already have it all together. And the reality of it is that a lot of the thinking that we've had in the past about culture and human behavior is out of date. It's dangerously out of date. But what happens is a lot of executive leaders in particular, they're afraid that they will be out of date, that they will be irrelevant, that they won't make it through. And the reality is they'll make it through stronger and better than ever if they can just be okay that it's just an update. It's nothing more and it's nothing personal about them. So I see that as actually the bigger problem to change blindness. So what is personal responsibility? I want to dive a little bit more deeply into this. This is such a rich topic. This is one of my favorite charts of everything we teach. Personal responsibility is first and foremost a mindset. We are either in a mindset where we think, I have no choice, I have to do this thing, I have an authority figure that is telling me or forcing me or whatever. So other directed doesn't mean I'm thoughtful and thinking about other people. It means I think that something other than my own authority is in charge. So I just want you to be aware of that. When we're in other directed thinking, the kinds of things that we're going to be saying and the body language we have and the behavior that we show is very wishy-washy. Well, I know I should. I know I have to do that. Probably will do that. Words like that. We can see it and we can feel it if we pay attention to it. So a lot of times the authority figure is an authority figure we've internalized, whether it's a teacher or a parents, and we're still letting them run our show, even if what they've said is outdated for us and we haven't questioned it. Another set of authority figures are the actual authority figures in our lives. For example, I just wrote an article about power distance index, which is the distance between the hierarchy and the perception of how you're supposed to behave in the face of authority figures. And in Malcolm Gladwell's book on outliers, he says that there were a series of plane crashes that were from the Korean airlines. And when they searched the black box, they found that because the Korean people had such a hierarchical kind of way of developing people, the second in command would be afraid to assert himself or herself to the captain or to the people in the control tower, and they would mitigate their communication. They would water it down so it wouldn't seem too aggressive, and literally crash after crash occurred until they solved that problem. They had to teach the second in command to be more assertive, be more able to express the urgency of a situation because they were so submissive because of that power index. So when we're in other directed, our power index is very big with these authority figures. We're not running our own show. So it's very important to understand this mindset. When we're in other directed, one of the attitudes we might take is to resentfully comply, and it's a very much reactionary kind of behavior. We don't feel, this is super important, it's a blind spot, we don't feel responsible for what we're doing in this state of resentful compliance. We don't feel responsible for the task itself being done at an A+. We don't feel responsible for the relationships that can feel that resentment. We don't feel responsible for our outcomes if they're mediocre. We're actually functioning as though we're kind of Eeyore-ish and pretty much like a victim. Another attitude we can take, and we can mix these up, it doesn't have to be either or. One is to rebelliously resist. And the attitude is, no, I won't, you can't make me. And so again, we don't feel responsible for the tasks, for the relationships, or the outcomes because we're too busy going, I'm not letting anybody control me. And so then our behavior is sort of stubborn and mean-spirited. And I'll give you a quick example. I dated a guy one time and we were out on a date and he was not wearing his safety belt. And I just said, just out of curiosity, why don't you wear your safety belt? And his answer was very telling. He said, I'm not letting the government control me. And I said, the government isn't even in the car with us. He was unconsciously in this other directed mindset. And there are people that are in this all the time around us. It's because the environment is such that they do feel that they don't have choice. It's not that they don't have choice, they just are more easy to interpret that they don't have choice. And so I remember one time a guy watched in this presentation and he said, oh my God, I've lived my whole life over on this side of the chart. I didn't even see it until right in this moment. I'm always angry or I'm always blaming. And I'm not ever feeling like I have any control over anything. And that's really what it looks and feels like. So quick example, let's say you have a teenager and her room's a mess and she's told her mom, hey, I'm going out with my friends tonight. And the mom says, no, you've been told to do that room over and over again and you haven't, so you're not going out unless you clean that room. If the daughter resentfully complies and cleans the room from resentful compliance, does she feel responsible for the room itself? Is she focused on, oh my gosh, I have this responsibility to do my room? Is she giving it an A effort or a C minus effort? So if I had you in the room, you'd probably be saying C minus, and that would be right. If she says, no, I'm not, Mom, you can't make me, I'll just skip going with my friends. Is she even thinking about the job of her room? She's not. She's thinking about rebelling against the mom, which is kind of where that 8th grade boy was until he was asked the question, what do you actually want? Then he started picking up responsibility for things. If she's resentfully complying and she's mad at her mom, is she feeling responsible for that relationship? Is she thinking, gosh, what did I do to get mom this upset? Just like in that instance, I said, are you going to see how you're doing, War? Is this teenager probably thinking self-awareness thoughts? Chances are very high that she's not. If she rebels and resists, is she thinking about her responsibility in that relationship? And is she feeling responsible for her outcomes? In other words, if she does it at a C minus, or if she goes to the car and her friends say, what's wrong? You look really upset. Is she saying, I put myself in a bad mood? Or is she saying, my mom really made me mad. My mom put me in this bad mood. Or if she decided not to go, would she say, hey, you guys, my mom said I have to clean my room to go and I decided I want to stay home? Or is she saying, my mom won't let me go? So you really want to think about this because it's a subtle difference between the other directed and what's called self-directed. Self-directed is when people remember they always have a choice. Now, a lot of times people are not used to asking, what am I feeling? What do I want? Even that boy, I said, what do you want? Do you want peace? Do you want peace with that teacher? A lot of times if the question isn't asked, they're not asking the question of themselves. I've had people that are 50 and 55 and 60 years old say, I'm not even used to asking myself these questions. And often it's a multi-layered answer. Maybe the first question is, I feel like punching someone's lights out. Well, what do I want to do? Well, I don't want to punch their lights out. But then the next thing is I want to do this. And so it's an important part of personal responsibility and emotional intelligence to know what you're feeling and to know what you want. It's only then that your yes is going to be different than resentful compliance, or your no is going to be different than rebelling and resisting. And in fact, because you're not in reaction to an authority figure, you are able to see other options. Like that teenager could have said, Mom, you're absolutely right. I'm so sorry. Would it be okay with you if I did it right when I get back home and maybe did an extra chore? Or would you be okay if I had my brother do it and I'll pay him? Or whatever. Like she could have negotiated something in a way that would have been different from just a yes or no, because she wouldn't be in reaction. She'd have more of her frontal lobe available to work through things. And that's what we really want in our employees. We want their frontal lobes available. I can't tell you how many people fight for other directed, like, well, yeah, but sometimes you have to go to work, and yeah, but you have to do this and you don't have freedom. And what I'm trying to help them to see is you always have freedom within even constraints. That's why somebody like a Nelson Mandela could be in prison 28 years and not lose his mind. He created ways to get through that were different than I'm a victim or I'm going to be angry all the time, which probably would have killed him. So it's a really important distinction to know this is an inside job. When a person says yes from the self-directed, it's very much like fine, fine in a good way. Yes, I'm fine to do that. In compliance, it's fine, I'll do that. So the surface behavior will look like yes and no, but the feeling, tone, and the quality is very different from one side to the other. In the self-directed, person thinks through all the consequences, both the positive and the negative, because there's always positive and negative. And therefore, because they're thinking it through and they're actually choosing, they feel responsible for the tasks. They feel responsible for the relationships. They feel responsible for the outcomes. And their behavior shows up as accountable. In other words, their thoughts, their attitudes, their response, their feelings, their behavior all line up. They say what they mean what they say, and it's very easy to identify. So we all know what accountable people feel like. We know that this is where the 29% of the population is generally playing, but we don't understand how to get from one side of the chart to the other. And that's why it's important to even recognize this is another underground problem that we have to come to terms with before we can think about doing other problem solving. Is if we don't have people in a strong, this is a resilient mindset to be self-directed. And it's a very weak and brittle mindset to be other-directed. I hope you guys can get that. Here's an important quote, because one of the things that I have found in my work is that when I learned all of this, I couldn't get enough of it. But the reality is a lot of people, this is jarring for them. Even when they're reading the articles and everything, because there's patterns that we've been holding on to as though this is what defines us. So when we start to mess with foundational things like how we raise families, how we raise kids in school, how do we do workplace culture, people get fearful and resistant because the feeling of being personally responsible is freedom. And that actually feels uncomfortable and unsafe to people. I've actually had people say, why can't we just be told what to do? I don't want to be responsible. So how do I be compassionate and receptive to resistance without pushing, but inviting? And sometimes people can't hold with the culture and they leave it for a while, or they leave it for good because they have to go through a certain amount of uncomfortableness and unsafety in their minds. It feels that way. And it's actually the way to joy and freedom. Here's a quick quote.
And a quick anecdote for me personally, I can say. So I've had the blessing in my life to take 2 maternity leaves, and one was pre-Lifeworks and one was post bringing in Lifeworks. And I will tell you, the coming back after my second maternity leave was much easier than coming back after the first one without having this responsibility-based model.
So personal responsibility is a felt experience. You actually can see it, feel it, notice it, have examples of it, all kinds of things. So a responsibility-based framework is the culture model that I said in my first objective I wanted you to be aware of. I've already talked about intrinsic motivation and personal responsibility. I don't know that I've said this directly, but everybody gets these skills. A lot of people at first, they think, well, how can that happen? It's too expensive. It's too time consuming. That's like saying we shouldn't all be able to afford a cell phone, and we can now. So because of technology, we all can have these skills. They shouldn't be for the keepers of the castle.
It's hard to measure the efficiency that we've gained from having a common set of tools, but I know that it's saving us time in meetings, troubleshooting issues quicker.
I really think it's super important that everyone's included in there and the process and the teachings, mentoring sessions.
We can prompt each other for gaps. If we start to go along a tool and somebody says, oh, will you do it this way? Or you forgot that piece, or that was perfect. And we can support each other. And there's no secrets at all. It's all out there. There's nobody that's the keeper of the knowledge, or you don't have to get to the next level. Everybody's included. It's more equal that way.
If everybody knows what we're working on doing, then they understand that we're trying to improve them, number one. And not only that, they understand when I say something, there's a framework and a language that I can use that we have a common understanding of.
And emotional intelligence, I've talked about how that's self-awareness and self-management, relationship awareness and managing of relationships. What I haven't talked about is social interest. And so the one thing I want you to know that Adler teaches that I think is so important is being interested in the consequences we cause other people. So what we typically do is we focus on what's going to happen to us. An example is a 5-year-old was at a grocery store and he asked his mom, why can't we park in this spot? It's right by the door. And it was the handicap spot. And the mother said to the son, because do you see that $500 on there? We'll get a ticket if we park there. We could get a ticket from a policeman and we would have to pay $500, which is all about the consequences to him. What she could have said was, you know, it's really great. We care about one another in this community. And so we want to help the people that can't walk well to be able to get to the store just like we can get to the store. So we give them the front parking spots so that we can help them to be just as able to go to the store as we can. And we miss opportunities all over the place to focus on how do we help each other. And there was a social study done where they took a picture of a handicapped person and they put it on the handicap sign and it said, please save this spot for someone like me. And in that experiment, when people would pull in and read that, they would come back out and park elsewhere. But as soon as they took that sign down and had the $500 warning, people just kept parking in that parking spot. Because the mindset is, if I think I can get away with it without getting caught, I'll do it. There's no awareness of the consequences we might be causing that handicapped person. So that's what social interest is. It's a highly important thing to have conversation about. If that boy at the 8th grade example would have said, well, I do want war with this teacher, I would have said to him, I won't be able to help you with that because I am not in the business of causing war. I'm in the business of creating a world where people love their lives. And that's an expression of social interest. I'm not just about me loving my life, I'm about helping others love their life too. And I'm included, but it's not all about me. And so social interest is something that's sorely lacking. And trustworthiness as the foundation means that if I'm in a difficult place with someone, I'm not ignoring it. I'm looking at that millennial perhaps, and I'm saying, am I at a 10 with that person? Or am I judging them and giving, our relationship a much lower rating? And if I am, what can I do about it? So I want to go into how do we do this? You've told us a lot about personal responsibility, that we need to go to intrinsic, but how do we start? How do we build it? How do we sustain something that is so different and so new? And part of it is that you have to have a structure in order to do so. So most people don't know what a framework is. In fact, most people don't know that only about 8% of the population focuses on systems, processes, and frameworks. And so a lot of the women that are on this program presenting are systems-minded thinkers. We're changing things at a systemic level, but the average person doesn't know how to build and scale a framework. It's sort of like if you imagined a pretty complex architecture, you'd have to factor in things like the plumbing and the electrical and the carpenters and all of the things that go into that process. So that's why I want you to know what a framework is. I'm going to be going over what our framework is, but it just is important from the perspective of this is the kind of stuff you need in a framework, even if you don't use something like our framework. So in our framework, the first step that needs to happen is that you have the CEO and the senior team aware of what are you transforming from into. And that means that they need to understand we're moving away from using all these extrinsic motivators and we're moving into this responsibility-based model. And they have to understand what it's going to entail in terms of time and effort. And the next thing is that you want to take measurements of things. It's kind of like if you went to a physical trainer and they said, okay, let's get your weight, let's get all your measurements, and we'll know where you're starting from, and then we'll be able to benchmark along the way where you've made some improvements. In our world, there are 3 assessments and what's called a return on investment target. So the first one is we help people to recognize what are the culture practices that you need to have in place. So even if some of you decide to do this survey, it's a free survey, it gives you ideas of what should I put in place, even if you don't use anything we do from that point forward. So a lot of people, they don't even know what their culture practices should be to begin with. And so even having questions about it makes a Socratic experience for people. We also use a temperament survey that is similar to a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or a Colby or a Strength Finders. It's a partner company, but the reason we like this model is it's based on colors, and people can remember colors, and they can remember colors of other people. One of our other panelists has some of the same colors I have in first and second place, and I could feel it in her right away. And so it allows you to kind of keep in mind, what are the priorities of this person that's in front of me? And how can I be in support of what's important to them? And so it creates a greater social awareness, social intelligence. And then we also measure things like how well people understand and approve of the purpose, values, visions, goals, procedures, and roles. And what often happens in alignment is people don't even have a good purpose, values, and visions story. And certainly there are people don't know it at all, or they don't approve of it because it isn't meaningful. And then we also measure trust and trust gaps and employee engagement, and then we remeasure those every 6 months. So it's just like that personal trainer would make sure that you're losing inches and you're losing pounds and things like that. The return on investment assessment is, let's say you're a company and you're losing $2 million a year on turnover. Well, we might say, why don't we help you reduce your turnover by 20%, in which case you'll save X amount of dollars, and it would more than cover your investment in doing it through this culture transformation. So for those people that are worried about how do we get the senior executives on board, give them a return on investment target that you're going to use for the culture transformation. We've had people use it to increase their billable hours. We've had it so that people increase their number of referrals from clients. So there's lots of things that can be a return on investment where you can more directly tie, when we get this result, we get this financial gain. You also need to get all of the senior team members on the bus. That means all your C-suite executives need to be aware of what's going on so that they're not inadvertently blocking or damaging the process that you're going through. And in our world, our framework is more than training. People will ask us a lot of times, well, are you a training company? Well, training is step 7 on this list. Are you a consulting company? Yes, all the steps involve oversight and integration of what's being learned. And so, yes, we are consulting all along the way. Are you doing assessment? Yes, I just named certain things that are assessments that are on this game plan. So a game plan for a culture transformation is more complex than a weekend seminar. It's an ongoing process and has some complexity to it. So these are all the things that should be in any kind of culture transformation framework. Assessing, I mentioned mentoring, which is very Socratic. Mentoring is the number one thing to be doing within a culture change, even during the foundational training, but especially after the foundational training is done. You want to continue the mentoring for everyone, no exceptions, every single month, no exceptions. And that is where the rubber hits the road. That's where people don't say, well, I don't even remember how to stop gossip. I don't even remember the tool, because A, it's on their phone app. B, it's being brought up when it's relevant during a mentoring session. And C, it's part of the culture integration that the company has put through. So the activities are not only comprehensive in the outset, they're comprehensive in the long run. And eventually companies are completely managing their culture transformation on their own, and they are using it to onboard and hire new people. So you want to make sure the managers and supervisors know about what it is to create trust and what it is to help build self-directedness, which was that personal responsibility.
My name's Lisa Meyer, and I managed about 1,000 people in 300 locations. And for those of you that are in healthcare, everything's always about productivity. How many patients can you see? How many patients can you treat? How fast can you do it? How quickly can you get them well? And we slipped into really the control-based. All we talked about was productivity. How can we get your productivity up? If your productivity's not up, we're going to write you up. We're going to terminate you. And it wasn't really the culture that we wanted to have with our team. So as I grew the regional team and got their skill sets up, we decided to do a pilot project with 15 of our facilities. And we really focused on how can you as a team meet your productivity goals, because the ultimate goal was to see more patients. It wasn't about profit that was going to sell it to the therapist that were working with the patients. So we started working with Judy on some of the different modules and training the teams on how to take that responsibility themselves. And they came up with some really great ideas on how to improve productivity without us putting the hammer down saying, well, you're not productive enough, so we're going to write you up. And it really became a great thing for our organization, because we were able to get that group of therapists much more engaged, which helped our patient care, which helped our customer satisfaction. And really, we started to see those results when we ended our project.
Next thing is to make sure that you have a value-based culture. So there's a book that I'll recommend called Delivering Happiness, and it's a good example of what it looks like to take values that are derived from your purpose and how do I build those values into the operations of the business. Part of those values are not only a company's core values, but the values that build trust, which are the ones that are shown here on the screen.
We get very specific information on how to show up as trustworthy, because if we don't have the same definition, then we can't get anything done. So it really, really helps to all be speaking the same thing. And we go over those 8 values that build trust. I talked to somebody today and said, oh, that was so nice. He was so straightforward in disclosing, and it gives everybody hopefully a sense of what trustworthiness really means. I don't just accept that, oh, that's just the way this person is, or that's just the relationship, or we just don't get along well. Because I know the 8 values that build trust, I know what symptom is being shown, and I know what the treatment is to address it. They might be acting that way because I'm not showing up in some way, or they might not know that I want something for more trust. So having that spelled out gives a lot more distinct actions that I can take to build it up again. So I do know immediately when it's not working, and I see it everywhere now, and I can make it better.
Our mentoring, we use these values during mentoring. So if I were to say to one of you, do you have any relationships that are not at a 10? So if you remember that little house picture, the foundation was trustworthiness. Let's say you're in a mentoring meeting and I ask you, are there any relationships that are not a 10? And a 10 just means we have no problems to work out. It doesn't mean you're best friends or anything. It just means we have no problems to resolve. So let's say you think it over and you think, I've got 3 that could use some work. One of them is a 9, one of them is a 6, and one of them is a 2. Well, first of all, you might not have even been aware you had 3 relationships that needed work. You might not have realized there was one that's a 2. And whatever your answer is doesn't matter. It's just an area of emotional intelligence because you're becoming self-aware. And then what you want to do is you want to be more self-aware by saying, well, in the relationship, let's say the one that's 2, which of these 8 behaviors am I falling down on? Maybe I'm not telling the person. I'm not disclosing that, hey, do you know what? I've been thinking about us in our work relationship. I give us a 2 right now, and you probably don't even know I'm feeling that way. So maybe you give yourself an X in the disclosure box, or maybe because you're so disgusted with this person, you've kind of given up on seeking excellence with them. So it causes you to do an inventory of where you're breaking trust with them, just like I did with that 8th grader. I said, do you want to see where you're doing war? And this would be like a checklist on where you're breaking trust. And then you also do the same thing with the person that you have the relationship with. In the mentoring session, this is so amazing because I don't even have to know who the name is. I don't want to know the name of the people. I don't want to know the story of why they're a 2. All of that stuff is not intended in the workplace. It really isn't. It's something that's a valuable thing to do if you go to a therapist, but it's not really the work of mentoring somebody. Mentoring somebody just helps them to see, I have 3 relationships that need work, and here are a couple of the broken places that I can start fixing. And so you start to apply the tools to which ones of these are broken, which is a really beautiful and efficient thing that quickly moves people out of analysis into action. That's the hardest thing. People always want to talk about their problems. They don't want to take action into shifting those problems. So the next thing that you want to do is you want to give all of the staff opportunities to operate in a cross-functional team manner. This is so important. I can't even begin to overemphasize this. When we talk about agile, one of the biggest problems in agility, enterprise agility, technology agility, is this inability of people to function well on teams. And especially once you have people with different levels and different roles and different responsibilities, it feels like there's all kinds of confusion about hierarchy and power structures, and a lot of fear comes into teams. And so when our kids were growing up, I have 5 children, and my kids are all grown now, but when they were growing up, the first 4 were very close in age. And so we raised them to feel empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. We had a very unconventional family life. We learned how to manage misbehavior with a certain tool that was not punishment or rewarding or any of the control models. And we taught them how to identify how to play on the team with us. But one of the things is they all had to learn how to lead a family meeting. And so by the time they were 5 years old, they already knew how to lead a family meeting because we would rotate the leadership. This is just one example. And one time we were doing a family meeting in front of a big audience of parents and teachers, and we had the 5-year-old run the meeting. And when I asked people, are you surprised to see a 5-year-old be such a strong leader? Because she knew how to run the meeting, how to stay on course, how to delegate, how to keep things moving. And they all raised their hand. They were shocked. And I said, what you don't see is how hard it was for me to become a good follower to a 5-year-old, because I'm a very dominant leader mother. And so for me to learn to take a back seat to a 5-year-old, and not only take a back seat, but to encourage and support her and help her to become efficient and effective, was just as important as her learning to be a leader, was just as important for me to learn how to be a follower to her and to all of my family. So that missing component of leader-follower agility is the biggest reason why people don't cross-function well on teams, which is huge ramifications. So you bring so much experience to people that they get it multiple times, and it becomes part of their larger way of functioning. So in even our step 7, which is our training, we recommend that you use a best practice called flipped training. And in flipped training, people receive individual content. So I could have a company that works globally, and they could all get the individual training, and it would be consistent. And they can do it whenever they want. Then an organization comes together as a group, and each group is managed by employees and oversight from us, but they're employee-led meetings to review what was learned in the individual modules and decide if they're going to adopt it. And that's what the group review is. And then they go into the monthly mentoring each month, and they're getting a review of what's been taught in the programming that month. And then the company builds what's called systems integration, where they integrate what's being taught into the operations of the business. So maybe you all learn a tool to stop gossip, and then that's brought up every month from a committee as one of the tools that's reviewed and is implemented every quarter with new employees, something like that. So that's really the power of flipped training, which is multiple ways of interacting with content and change, and so that it becomes ongoing. Then you're at your prize. Your prize is that your teams know how to redesign systems, processes, and structures. In the case of that healthcare organization that I mentioned, they're IT healthcare. They have to build things on the fly, and they're doing it because there's no energy going toward fighting, gossiping, being stressed out, being shut down. So their cross-functional teams are literally redesigning things right now through this pandemic that they would not have the energy or the resiliency to create otherwise. That's the prize you want to go for, is how do we have so much emotional intelligence that we can handle anything, whether it's globalization or diversity and inclusion or technology, and we're all in it together. So the last point was, what kind of standardized behaviors cause you to integrate what you're doing into the operations of your business? It's important that you do the monthly mentoring. It's important that you have assessments so that people can course correct. If you don't have those assessments, people don't know where they are. They don't even see where they've progressed or where they've fallen back and what has caused it. And then that integration of values is so critical, because even if you have very conventional thinkers, once they've gotten used to your culture model, even if it's initially very unconventional, it becomes their new norm, and they support it as the new norm. But in the beginning, it feels like a foreign language to people to do some of these things that I'm sharing with you. Tara, do we have any questions right now?
One question. How long does a company work with Lifework systems?
Typically, when a company does our culture transformation process, it's 18 months. I really appreciate this question because it's slow and steady that wins the race. So employees are putting in a total of about 4 hours a month. About an hour of that, hour and a half of that is their individual online modules that they do whenever they want in a given month. 2 hours of it is sitting in an employee-led group session that they take turns leading. And another point of it is just their mentoring, their 30-minute mentoring. And if they're co-mentoring, they're mentoring 30 minutes and being mentored 30 minutes. So it's about 4 to 4.5 hours a month for 18 months. And then after that, it's just making sure that there's ongoing mentoring. Some companies actually just continue the training on their own, and some companies use our framework without any oversight from us. So they just buy all the training and all the assessments, but we don't stay directly involved in them because of, they just want to do it that way. They don't have the budget, or they just want to do it that way. So it's typically about that long.
The employee leader is any employee who has completed that at least that first 12 months. An orientation candidate is simply a person who starts in January or comes in after January and is going to be onboarded. And an employee leader could be also an orientation candidate. Some of you guys did that. In your first year on board, you also stepped up to the plate and said, I want to teach it while I'm learning it.
That way we can kind of both
Jump in.
interject at the same time.
Do you find that you're getting good response to this process that you're doing?
Yeah, the response and just the class, just everyone participating was good. We sit down, we go through it, kind of rough draft, then we go through it one more time to kind of finalize what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
And then we actually go through the modules and role play what we're going to say. And
You do this with a co-partner?
And they actually will look through it ahead of time and maybe make a point, hey, we need to talk about this key point a little more.
Yeah.
You didn't bring your binder with you. What was your reason for that?
Okay, that's not going to help.
What can you do in the future to make sure that
You're heading the right way, but what future are you talking about?
the next time we meet?
Too long. So you guys see, I want you guys to see this because this could become an ongoing cycle. Did you bring your It Just Got Real form and have it filled out?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so what I want is I want you to do that by Friday. Like this is Wednesday, and I'd like you to do that by Friday, and make sure that you get a copy to me. Are you willing to do that?
Yes.
I have an answer here, but I want to hear what you guys think.
I don't see how it's different than any other issue that they would be having, whether it's with management or without. So one of the things we talk about is when you have an issue with somebody, that you talk about the issue and not really focus on the person.
Right.
And so then you can really focus on the issue and then work through the issue itself.
How to resolve it, correct?
Yes.
Something you learn it so much more than when you're just on the receiving end of it. And imagine if Erin was trying to do this without your help. It would be insane. She wouldn't be able to do it. And imagine how good it will feel when you guys get to the day where you can mentor Erin if she needs it. Because this isn't about I'm above you and I know more than you. This is about I'm here to support you and make sure you're well onboarded and you're well tooled. And then it's all about helping each other. So don't even hold yourself in this box of I'm only an employee leader to this person. And even if they hire somebody here that's higher on the chain, from title, you can still mentor them.
How it impacts everybody as a whole, and the best way I learn something is teaching something. So it just makes it more immersive, and rather than receiving it, I'm also giving it.
So I hope you get the idea of what that was. That was employees, regular employees who were passionate about the culture, coming together to learn how to lead the group sessions of the new employees that were being hired in that company. They were also learning how to mentor an employee without getting into a bunch of analysis questions. Like that one question where she said, well, why do you think you didn't bring your binder? A lot of us are trained to ask questions like, why is this happening and who's to blame? And those are very useless questions. The real question should be what and how questions, like what will you do next time? How will you get it to me by Friday? Because it's all about getting them to move into action quickly. The employees are the ones that are buying in. The employees are the ones that are proud to bring the culture forward. It's not all the managers having to do it. The manager might be on that team, but they don't have to be the team leading. In fact, it's not always good for it to be the leaders only. It's good if you have a cross mix. The commitments that I'm asking you guys to consider is, are you willing to go out of your way, whether it's in your family, whether it's inside yourself, whether it's inside of a business or a community, a church or something? Are you willing to go out of your way? to dismantle that soup that I spit in, which is a time commitment. Are you willing to consider that the way we've been doing culture could be outdated? Because a lot of people do not even want to consider that. So you have to really search your soul. Am I willing to put it down and learn something new that does not make me irrelevant? It just makes me smart. So I just want to let you know I'm offering a few things right now. I will send them to you so that you have them after this event is over. And they are ways for you to progress forward without any more financial investment unless you decide you want to keep moving forward. And then I want to just end on this quote. It really is true. This quote is really true. And right now, because of the pandemic, it might not feel like you feel all that brave, but you are braver than you think you are. You're more talented than you realize. You're more capable of becoming resilient and agile. And don't stop believing in that. That's really why I've shared it this way. So I really appreciate this opportunity, and I really thank all of you who are on this summit with me.